Hello, dear friends. I talked yesterday about the mysterious alchemist Fulcanelli, to whom the famous film director Guillermo del Toro dedicated a movie. And today it's time to talk about his only disciple. Although there is a lot of current news, I consider this topic exciting, and I can't cover everything that happens in the world, although I try to do it. Opinion piece. The last alchemist, Fulcanelli's only disciple. His name was Eugène Léon Canseliet. He saw Fulcanelli in Seville in 1952. It is said he followed the Dry Way of Alchemy. His method was the Regulus Star of Antimony. He wrote the prologue for each of his master's books. Some say that Fulcanelli was actually Canseliet. It is also said that Fulcanelli's books were written by himself. They talked about unknown brothers from the mysterious city of the sun. Isaac Newton discovered the Sophic Mercury, but ended up intoxicated. The Philosopher's Stone is equivalent to the Chintamani stone in Hinduism. Jung discovered the alchemy throughout the Buddhist book with Taoist basis. Jung discovered the parallelism between the Philosopher's Stone and the figure of Christ. Europe calls on Cuba to release detained opponents and journalists. Battle between the forces of light and darkness over the crisis narrative. We are entering a window of time called an intersection event. Solara predicts that the dam will break between this August and the end of 2022. Everything will intensify from August onwards, according to the 2012 portal for the Victory of Light. The first part runs from August to December 2021, and the second lasts for the whole of the year 2022. Next year. A drastic intervention will be carried out on the surface at the right time. Let's start. The past is no longer what it was. Ancient alchemists tried for centuries to find the Philosopher's Stone. In 1975, 2 weeks after Franco's death, a supposed alchemist transmuted lead into gold on Spanish television. It was in Directissimo, the medieval program from José María Íñigo, in front of millions of viewers at home, and chemists and jewelers on the set who were amazed. But this French gentleman eventually committed suicide, or perhaps they killed him because he knew too much. Another character is Eugène Léon Canseliet. French writer and alchemist, is famous for having been the only disciple of the mysterious alchemist Fulcanelli, and disembodied in 1982 at the age of 81. He may not have obtained the elixir of immortality, but he did obtain spiritual enlightenment, which is more important than the preservation of the material body. He wrote the prologue to the mystery of the cathedrals and the philosopher's dwellings. Later in his life, after his master departed this world, he took up a quiet life in France and continued to study and practice what Fulcanelli taught him, even accepting students. Canseliet frequented Fulcanelli from 1916 onwards and saw him again in Seville in 1952. Fulcanelli must have been a centenarian then. However, Fulcanelli had remained a mysterious and even mythical character, as very little is known about him. The legend tells of a strange castle-like mansion that Fulcanelli had on a hill in a mountainous area in the province of Seville, that he welcomed alchemists from all over the world to do this work, and they were all very polite, educated and enlightened, and that they wore ancient clothes to add more mystery to the subject. I can imagine the count of such men living in this sophisticated and aristocratic environment. Let's see if someone will give me an email to ask for a scholarship in this school. Just kidding, it's a joke. The French magazine Jacob's Tower devoted special issue to the mystery of Fulcanelli's identity, and there are several hypotheses. The only person who knew him was Eugène Canseliet, to whom Fulcanelli submitted his manuscripts for publication in 1925, but he never revealed his identity. Claude Dije expressed that the person who hid or still hides in our days behind the famous pseudonym of Fulcanelli is the most famous and undoubtedly the last true alchemist, perhaps the last of this century. Biography. Canseliet was born on December 18, 1899 in Sarcelles. He studied fine arts in Marseille. He read the book The Great Initiates by Chouret, and at the age of 13 he discovered alchemy throughout the reading of a Japanese paper copy of Hermes Unveiled by Ciliani, published for the first time in 1832. He became familiar with occultism by reading Papus, Stanislas de Guaita and Fabre d'Olivet. Edouard Chouret is a French writer, esotericist and musicologist, author of novels, plays, historical, poetic and philosophical writings. His most important work is The Great Initiates, a study of the secret history of religions. Dr. Papus was Gerard Anaclet Vicent Encos, a Galician born in La Coruña in 1865 and died in Paris in 1916. He was a French physician and occultist of Spanish origin, a great popularizer of occultism and founder of the modern Martinist order. In 1888 he co-founded his own group, the Kabbalistic Order of the Rosicrucians. Stanislas de Guaita was a French occultist and poet, co-founder along with Josephine Peladan of that order. The Mute Book, or Mutus Liber, is a hermetic philosophical work published in La Rochelle in 1677, which contains no text but only images, hence its name. It is among the main books on alchemy in early modern literature, as much as Michael Myers' The Flight from Atalanta, which I talked about another day. Carl Gustav Jung studied the damn book and owned a copy of the 1677 edition. He used it mainly to illustrate his work entitled Psychology and Alchemy. In his book, Jung explains how alchemy is a speculative thought that seeks spiritual balance, whose metaphorical form would be the Philosopher's Stone. This process is accompanied by the creation of a repertoire of mental images or archetypes that would gradually lead to a collective unconscious. More recently, Lee Stavenhagen worked on the narrative structure used to illustrate the damn book. In his research, Jean Fleuret and Patrick Sembel have been trying to define the content of the Mutus Liber, putting it in its religious, intellectual and scientific context. According to Canseliet himself, he only began to see Fulcanelli from 1916 to 1922. It is throughout Fulcanelli that he would have introduced him to Julien Champagne, a good connoisseur of alchemy, who suggested him to read Alchemy and the Alchemists by Louis Figuier, a painter and designer. Julien Champagne is best known today for having illustrated Fulcanelli's works. In 1920, Canseliet entered the Sarcelles gas plant and began practicing alchemy. In 1922, he claims to have attended a transmutation performed by Fulcanelli. Teaching. Although Canseliet took students and chose to pass on much of the alchemical knowledge imparted to him by the adept given to the 20th century, Fulcanelli, Canseliet chose universities and intellectual cycles less esoteric than his master, and simply passed on knowledge related to the great work. Les decided to keep the discretion so customary of the great Hermetic initiates, the unknown brothers of the mysterious City of the Sun, as Fulcanelli would have called them. Canseliet met with Frater Albertus, a German-American alchemist practicing in Salt Lake City, Utah. According to Albertus, it was Canseliet who taught him the secret principle necessary to perform the great work of magnum opus. Canseliet believed throughout Fulcanelli's teachings that the only true method was the dry way, particularly the Regulus Star of Antimony, the path probably used by Fulcanelli himself. Regulus is the name of the brightest star in the constellation Leo. Although actually Regulus is a constellation of 4 stars that look blue. The alchemical key used by Isaac Newton in his coded writings was that of Regulus, which is the name of the star at the heart of the constellation Leo, and it is known that symbols such as iron and antimony appeared in that Regulus. Sophic Mercury. Isaac Newton became interested in alchemy in the mid-1660s and began to buy and read the fundamental treatises of the alchemical art. One of the chemists whose work most influenced him was Robert Boyle, from 17th century, from whose books he took several notes in his notebooks. From Boyle to some is the true father of chemistry. He believed he has discovered the way to prepare the mysterious Sophic Mercury, the first stage in the process of obtaining the Philosopher's Stone. The idea of alchemy is that if metals are broken into their primary elements, they can then be reunited to make others, and only pure metals are able to combine and transmute matter into its purest form, which is gold as a symbol of the spirit. Sophic Mercury would become a kind of universal solvent, capable of decomposing substances to their simplest and purest form, and with it could be obtained the famous Philosopher's Stone, which some experts in alchemy claim that it was a mixture of pyrite, tartaric acid, dew, and that ingredient, and that allowed the transformation of imperfect bodies that touched imperfect bodies. From imperfect to perfect, I mean. And finally, the manufacture of that mysterious mercury that Newton had already described in one of his writings as the vital agent diffused throughout all the things that exist in the world. And it is the mercurial spirit, extremely subtle and very volatile, dispersed in all places. That was the Sophic Mercury that Newton took so much interest in making, and it is now understood that when they removed his remains from Westminster Abbey in 1979 and analyzed them, they found a high concentration of mercury, highly neurotoxic, 15 times higher than normal in his hair. This is called mercury poisoning. That was the price that Newton had to pay for so many years after his Sophic Mercury. Controversial identity. Some believe that Eugène Canseliet was actually Fulcanelli, but this is unlikely considering Canseliet's extremely young age at the time of the publication of The Mystery of the Cathedrals and the Philosophical Adobes. This is further exposed in the vast historical, chemical, hermetic and architectural knowledge possessed by the Fulcanelli initiate. There are many hypotheses about his true identity. Joseph Henry Rossini, Julien Champagne, or even Canseliet himself. This last hypothesis, in which Fulcanelli would actually be Canseliet, has been defended by Paul Lecoq, Robert Amadou, and Jean-Paul Dumont, a famous specialist in Greek mythology who claims that Eugène Canseliet would have authorized him to reveal that he was the author of the books published under Fulcanelli's authorship. Patrick Riviere wrote a book that allegedly revealed Fulcanelli's true identity as a well-to-do Parisian physicist who was a good friend of Pierre Curie. Canseliet supported this claim of friendship, saying that Fulcanelli had many good colleagues and aristocratic acquaintances. Canseliet dated Fulcanelli starting in 1916, saw him again in Seville in 1952. Fulcanelli would then have been about 130 years old, but Fulcanelli remains mysterious, perhaps medical. Several hypotheses are circulating. Fulcanelli would be the elderly Joseph Henry Rossini, young Julien Champagne, the one who illustrates his books, or Canseliet. This last hypothesis, Fulcanelli equal to Canseliet, is defended by Paul Lecoq, Robert Amadou, Jean-Paul Dumont, famous specialist in Greek philosophy, who affirms, in quotes, Eugène Canseliet had authorized us to reveal that he himself was the author of the books bearing Fulcanelli's signature. Alchemy. Western alchemy has always been closely related to Hermeticism, a philosophical and spiritual system that has its roots in Hermes Trismegistus, a legendary Greek Egyptian alchemical deity. These two disciplines influenced the birth of Rosicrucianism, an important esoteric movement of the 17th century. Alchemy was practiced in Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt, Persia, India and China, in ancient Greece, the Roman Empire, and in the Islamic Empire, and then entered Europe throughout Spain until the 18th century. It is an ancient scientific and spiritual practice and a philosophical discipline that combines elements of chemistry, metallurgy, physics, medicine, astrology, semiotics, mysticism, spiritualism, and art, all a cocktail. The Philosopher's Stone. The Philosopher's Stone is a legendary alchemical substance said to be able to convert base metals such as lead into gold or silver. Occasionally, it was also believed to be an elixir of life, useful for rejuvenation and possibly to achieve immortality or at least longevity. For many centuries, it was the most coveted goal in alchemy. The Philosopher's Stone was the central symbol of the mystical terminology of alchemy, symbolizing perfection at its highest expression, enlightenment and heavenly bliss. The efforts to discover the Philosopher's Stone were known as the Opus Magnum or the Great Work. The equivalent of the Philosopher's Stone in Buddhism and Hinduism is the Chintamani stone. The Philosopher's Stone has been attributed with many mystical and magical properties. The most frequently mentioned properties are the ability to transmute metals into gold or silver, and the ability to cure all kinds of diseases and prolong the life of anyone who consumes a small portion of the Philosopher's Stone. Other properties mentioned include the creation of perpetually burning lamps, the transmutation of common crystals into precious stones and diamonds, the reactivation of dead plants, the creation of flexible or malleable glass, or the creation of a clone or homunculus. It is often said to be orange or saffron colored, or red when ground into powder, or in a solid form and intermediate between red and purple, transparent and glass-like. The weight is talked about as being heavier than gold, and it is said to be soluble in any liquid but incombustible in fire. Roger Bacon. The first true alchemist in medieval Europe was Roger Bacon. His work meant as much to alchemy as that of Robert Boyle to chemistry and Galileo Galilei to astronomy and physics. Bacon was an Oxford Franciscan who studied optics and languages in addition to alchemy. Franciscan ideals of conquering the world rather than rejecting it led to his conviction that experimentation was more important than reasoning. Roger Bacon has also been credited with initiating the search for the Philosopher's Stone and the elixir of life. That medicine, which will remove all impurities and corruptions from the lesser metals, will also, in the opinion of the wise men, remove so much of the corruptibility of the body, and human life may be prolonged for many centuries. Paracelsus. European alchemy continued along this same path until the dawn of Renaissance. The most important name of this period is Paracelsus, who gave alchemy a new form, promoting the use of observations and experiments to learn about the human body. Paracelsus retained much of the Metic, Neoplatonic, and Pythagorean philosophies. The alchemist's substances are no mystery today. The mystery is how to combine and work them properly. First, metals: gold, silver, lead, copper, tin, iron, mercury, zinc, and magnesium. Non-metals: phosphorus, sulfur, arsenic, and antimony. Acids: sulfuric, muriatic, nitric, acetic, formic, and citric. Compounds: aqua regia, ammonia, alcohol, gunpowder, and vitriol. The processes necessary in the art of alchemy are many: calcination, purification, distillation, digestion, sublimation, separation, and fermentation, and they were called the labors of Hercules. Jung's interpretation. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Gustav Jung initiated his contact with alchemy in 1928, following the commentary requested by the sinologist Richard Wilhelm on the translation of the first 8 sections of a Chinese physiological alchemy treatise of the 13th century, The Secret of the Golden Flower, a Buddhist book with a Taoist base. The beginning of this contact with alchemy was therefore determined by his contemplation of the basis of the process of individuation in the work, as well as a processual center which he later called the self. He needed 10 years to elaborate the dictionary of cross-references in order to understand the meanings included in the alchemical texts, as well as 15 years to have a library similar to those of his dreams. Jung saw alchemy as a Western proto-psychology dedicated to the achievement of individuation. In his interpretation, alchemy was the vessel in which Gnosticism survived its various patches in the Renaissance. In this sense, Jung saw alchemy as comparable to yoga in the West. He also interpreted Chinese alchemical texts in terms of their analytical psychology as means to individuation. Jung argues in his Psychology and Alchemy, 1944, that observable phenomena of the unconscious, such as dreams, contain symbolic elements that can also be found in alchemical symbology. In addition, he devotes to an analysis to the parallelism between the concepts of the so-called Philosopher's Stone on the one hand and the figure of Christ on the other. He illustrated throughout the figures of the Rosarium Philosophorum included in his work, The Psychology of Transference, 1946, those transferential phenomena that occur in the process of individuation. Finally, in his work, Mysterium Conjunctionis, he configures the culmination of the confrontation between alchemy and analytical psychology. This is the end of this of alchemy, of this subject, of this issue. Updated report of the planetary situation by the 2012 portal of the Intelligence Center for the Victory of Light. The cleansing of the Chimera group continues. The forces of light have succeeded in completely clearing all subway bases of the Chimera separatist civilization, including the Congo complex. Most of the hostages who were captured there have been released, although some of them are still captured on the etheric and astral planes. Donald Rumsfeld has been captured by the forces of light on the etheric plane and taken to the galactic central sun for reprocessing. He is no more. This leaves only two members, Kissinger and Cheney, of the Unholy Four still alive, and the forces of light have now expanded their list of prime targets and renamed it the Unholy Five. Henry Kissinger, Dick Cheney, Bill Gates, Anthony Fauci and Klaus Schwab are now included. The physical Spider King and Queen have also been removed, along with most of the minor physical Chimera spiders. The remaining Chimera forces are now concentrated on the surface, and nothing more can be revealed about that momentarily. What remains now to be cleared underground are some military bases still in the hands of the negative military, including those in Antarctica. Then subway tunnels, including those between the US and Mexico, California and Nevada, and China and Myanmar, which have been used for human trafficking, and also abuse centers under some black nobility castles and under some Catholic churches, and the schools under the control of the Jesuits. The top priority of the resistance and the Positive Army now is to rescue as many as possible who are still captured there. There are still some soulmates, mostly captured Pleiadians, on the top commanders of the Galactic Confederation held hostage in subway bases of the Negative Army and in some military installations on the surface, especially in the Negev Desert, Israel, near Abu Kamal in Syria, and near Grozny in Chechnya. The resistance and the Pleiadian fleet have been in contact several times in recent months with positive armed forces in the US, Russia and China, and certain plans have been set in motion to prepare for the event. The subway complexes at Cheyenne Mountain and Thule, Greenland are being prepared for this purpose. The forces of light are also intensively cleansing the negative, non-physical astral and etheric entity, and their number has now dropped below 50 billion. At the top of the dark, etheric and astral hierarchy, there are still a few chimera spiders controlling a few thousand archons in insectoid voids called Lords of Karma, who in turn control a few million dracos, managing the remaining tens of billions of reptilian entities. In the past, the councils of the Galactic Confederation did not reach unity in their plans on how to liberate planet Earth, and there were many opposing views on this issue among the Confederation staff. Semjase and some other top commanders took certain actions last week, and now a consensus has been reached within the Confederation that the drastic intervention will take place at the appropriate time on the planet's surface. Not much can be said about this at this time, other than the fact that if the dark side crosses the center line, the intervention would come much sooner and be harsher. After early August, certain situations will intensify as we are entering a special intersection event time window that begins in August of this year and ends in late 2022. The first part of that window being August-December 2021 and the second part January-December 2022. Interestingly, Gary Heseltine, Vice President of the International Coalition for Extraterrestrial Research, estimates that the tongue will break in the next 6 to 12 months. Solara, the 1111 Gate visionary, estimates that the tongue will break between now and the end of 2022. On the surface of the planet, there is a battle going on between the forces of light and dark over the health crisis narrative. The dark forces are pushing their perpetual agenda of blocking with force band-aids that destroy the Antakarama connection between the higher self and the human personality. The new variant is spreading very fast, but now is very mild. Therefore, the forces of light are beginning to promote the end of the lockdowns and more effective treatment. 2 days ago, Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz predicted an end to lock-ins for Austria and the change in approach to government enforcement of mandates on the basis of personal responsibility and freedom. The mainstream media outside Austria didn't report this as usual. Protests in Cuba. Cuba restricts access to Facebook and messaging apps amid protests. Cuba has restricted access to social networks and messaging platforms such as Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and Telegram since Monday, global internet monitoring firm NetBlock said Tuesday, amid widespread anti-government protests. This Tuesday continues the partial restriction of service and selective blocking of social networks that has hampered the flow of information on the island, following Sunday's historic protests where demonstrated broadcast live what was happening in different parts of the country. Sunday, July 11th, opened a new chapter in the recent history of the island. It began in San Antonio de los Baños and spread like a wave throughout the rest of Cuba. It was there, in a city 26 kilometers from Havana, where on Sunday at 9 a.m. the first live broadcast of people protesting in the streets began via Facebook Live, something known by Cubans as La Directa, the direct. Opponents of the government prefer La Directa because it cannot be deleted, unlike videos recorded and published on other platforms. This is how the live transmissions from San Antonio lit the fire in other cities that joined the demonstrations until the internet stopped working in several parts of the country. It was like a domino effect. When fear disappears, there is no turning back. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, along with Republican legislator and Cuban exiles, held held a round-table discussion on Tuesday in which they highlighted the main reasons for the protest in Cuba and asked the US to help provide internet access on the island. European Union calls on Cuba to release opponents and journalists detained in protests. The European Union Tuesday urged Cuban authorities to immediately release citizens arrested in Sunday's protest, as well as journalists whose detention is considered unacceptable. In quotes, "We are aware of reports not only of the arrest of people, of opponents and activists, but also of journalists. This is absolutely unacceptable," European Union spokesman Peter Stano said at the European Commission's daily press conference. Americas. 2 new gold deposits discovered in Colombia. The number of gold sources for exploitation in Colombia has increased after the discovery of 2 new gold deposits was announced. The transnational company Gran Colombia Gold reported that it has found 2 new high-grade sections in its El Silencio mine, located in Segovia, in the northwest of the country. Video of the Moon, Venus and Mars falling on the Popocatépetl volcano supposedly and then exploding. Surveillance cameras located in the Mexican state of Puebla captured last Sunday the moment when the Moon, Venus and Mars flew over Popocatépetl, the second highest volcano in the country, in the night sky. It was an optical illusion. The video shows how the celestial bodies descend towards the mountain and disappear in its crater before Popocatépetl spews a column of smoke. This Monday and Tuesday, Mars and Venus align and are visible from Earth just a finger's width apart. Spain. A controversial uranium mine in Spain is blocked. The Nuclear Safety Council has vetoed the construction of a uranium processing plant in Retortillo, Salamanca. In this way, the opening of a mine in the region is almost ruled out after years of struggle on the part of the neighbors. 40% of Spanish judges believe that their independence is not respected by the government and parliament. The Alternativas Foundation wants that almost 40% of Spanish judges believe that their independence has not been respected by the government and parliament, and therefore proposes, among other things, to restrict influence of associations in the election of the General Council of the Judiciary, due to their links with the parties. Economy. New York Stock Exchange falls. The S&P 500 and Nasdaq fell Tuesday after hitting record highs earlier in the session, as investors digested the rise in June consumer prices and earnings from JP Morgan and Goldman Sachs that kicked off the quarterly reporting season. Inflation has peaked. Consumer prices rose by the most in 13 years in June amid supply constraints and continued the rebound in travel-related service costs from crisis-depressed levels as the economic recovery gains momentum. Revil ransomware gang websites become unreachable. Websites run by the Revil ransomware gang suddenly became inaccessible on Tuesday, prompting speculation that the group had been taken down. California to compensate forcibly sterilized people. California agreed to pay reparations to those who were forcibly sterilized under the old laws aimed at people deemed unfit to have children. Europe. Heavy rains flooded Zurich streets, caused trouble chaos. Switzerland suffered one of the heaviest rains ever recorded during a storm that caused flooding and trouble chaos Tuesday in its financial capital, Zurich. France fines Google €500 million over copyright. France's antitrust watchdog on Tuesday fined Alphabet's Google €500 million for failing to comply with the regulator's orders on how to conduct talks with the country's new publishers in a copyright dispute. Afghan commandos caught in fierce Taliban attack. Minutes after returning from a mission Tuesday before dawn, a convoy of exhausted Afghan commandos was speeding back from its base to try to extricate a wounded policeman trapped by Taliban insurgents on the outskirts of Kandahar. Africa. Worst violence in years spreads in South Africa as grievances escalate. Crowds clashed with police and looted or touched shopping malls in South African cities on Tuesday, with dozens of people reported killed as grievances sparked by the jailing of former President Jacob Zuma spread to the country with the worst violence in years. South African riots hit agriculture, threaten food supply. South African farmers have been hit by days of rioting and looting as trucks carrying produce are unable to deliver to markets, threatening food supplies, industry officials said. And that's all for today. Thanks a lot, dear friends.